Hey everybody, welcome back. Got something a little interesting for you this time. You know, people send us speakers from all over the place and we get who knows what all the time. And most of the time it's budget level to mid-fi level, performance and price range stuff. Because the customer's looking for, several things. One, improve the performance of their speakers without having to buy new speakers. And two, they're looking for a fun project that they can do where they can go in and they can build new crossovers and rewire everything and they can make their product better. They can improve their speakers and it's kind of a fun project. So I don't often get really high-end stuff in here or really expensive stuff in here, but I do occasionally have customers bring stuff in for me to take a look at. And in this case, this is one of those companies that we tend to think of as one of the more bigger or more elite companies with that well-known name. And that's this little speaker from Wilson Audio. Yes, someone sent me in a Wilson Duette. And it's a pretty nice little speaker. It's got its virtues. And one of those is just how well it's built. The cabinets, I know they often built their stuff out of Corian. I don't know if this is Corian or not, but the whole thing is in a gloss black, and it is really nice, and it's beautifully done. So you definitely get your money's worth when you look at finish. The grill is really heavy, and it has a really adverse effect on the response. So I would definitely recommend, if you're listening to these, to take the grills off. ScanSpeak style drivers, and these are ScanSpeak drivers, I should say. It's one of their 8-inch woofers and one of their tweeters. The tweeter has this special little felt built all around it here, like they're really going to the extreme here to do away with surface reflections. Unfortunately, this foam layer that's on the front baffle here does cause some diffraction right there in the tweeter's response. So there is some stuff going on there. But all in all, the build quality of these things are great. Nice binding post on the back. Beautifully done. Big port that's in a big aluminum port. So they're spending money in areas to make the stuff look the part. They're not just selling a speaker. They're selling some audio jewelry. And a lot of the customers that spend money at this level, they're looking for audio jewelry. They're looking for a name, and there's nothing wrong with that. They certainly deliver when it comes to that. And you buy a finely made speaker. And before we get into how it performs, let's look at this one last thing here. This is the crossover. The crossovers that they build, they're all potted, so you can't really see what they really use. I kind of know, though, from pretty good experience, what type of stuff is found in there, and they have good quality parts in the crossover. And this one is external, so this thing mounts in the stand down below, and then you have your input, and then you have your jumpers that go from here up to the speaker. And then here, they have part of the tweeter circuit run through this set of binding posts, and you remove this set of binding posts, and there's a couple of different resistors that are little resistor bundles that you can put across these two binding posts to change the level of the tweeter. One of them is a 5.3 ohm actual value, and the other one is a 4.2 ohm. So that's the way this thing is set up, which is great for me because it makes it easy for me to measure the drivers independently. I can measure the crossover and see exactly what it's doing, and I can then play with it. I can measure the drivers themselves without having to try to go in and remove and take apart a crossover and stuff like that. It's all right there, and so it made it easy to mess with. They also provide these umbilical cords that go from the crossover up to the speaker, and the way they've got this done is you have to kind of feed these things down underneath the binding post and tighten them up, and then the ones above it, and then there's kind of a lot of interference with these things trying to get them all underneath there and stuck under there or on top of it. It would have been easier if they spaced them a little further apart, or if there was an input on one side and output on the other side. But the way it fits into the stand, it all has to be on the same side. So it's built the way it is for the sake of the way they want it to function. But it is a little cumbersome getting this stuff in there. Also, there's two sets of cables that come with this thing. There's what's known as the gray cable and the brown cable, and they're labeled a little bit differently. There's a difference in so-called inductance. I say so-called inductance. They say that there's a difference in the inductance. This one, the brown one, is the one you're supposed to use if the speaker is near the wall, and the gray one is the one that you're supposed to use if it's more in free space. So let's look at how these things measure. What do you get for, I think these are $12,500 a pair, and stands are extra. Stands are another $1,795, I think, or something like that. Let's look at the on-axis 1 meter frequency response. Let's take a look at it. And when I shot it, first thing I noticed was, wow, there is no baffle step loss compensation in this thing. And I also looked at some measurements that were posted online to kind of confirm that this isn't nothing wrong with the speaker, that it is as it is, and found some measurements from a review done by Soundstage, and their measurements looked almost exactly like mine. No baffle step compensation. Now, what does that mean? What is baffle step compensation? Well, anytime you put a speaker in a cabinet, it's going to perform different than if you put it on an infinite baffle. Put it on an infinite baffle, the whole frequency range that it covers all plays from the baffle forward. When you put it in an enclosure, at some point the woofer's output will wrap around the enclosure and become omnidirectional. And when it does, part of that output goes away from you and part of it comes at you. So you're kind of losing some of the output from it when you have that baffle step loss. It's called step loss because you're losing output. So again, as the wavelengths wrap around, it goes the other direction. So at what frequency that happens depends on the width of the baffle. With this baffle, it's going to start becoming omnidirectional about 600 to 700 hertz. It's going to start wrapping around, and below 600 hertz, it's going to have output going the other direction. With a stand-mounted speaker or a bookshelf speaker where the baffle gets smaller, it's going to start doing that at a higher frequency. It could be 700 to 800 hertz, or in the case of some of these smaller baffled bookshelf speakers in here, the baffle is such that the step loss starts occurring at about 900 hertz or something like that. So let's look at this measured response. That's with the brown cable. And then I thought, all right, let's look at the measured response with the gray cable. So I put that cable on and I did an overlay. So let's look at the overlay using both of these cables. Looks the same, doesn't it? Looks exactly the same. So I don't know that there is any difference in the cable. There's certainly not any measurable difference from one cable to the other. And examining the cables, they look just alike. So I don't see any physical difference in these. I didn't start measuring it for capacitance and inductance, but a cable this short, even if the geometry was slightly different, I don't see that there would be very much inductance that could change from one of these cables to the other if the geometry was different, because we really just don't have very long of a piece of cable there. It'd be different if it were really long. You might get a little bit of an effect of the variance in inductance versus capacitance, but in a little piece this short, I don't think so. And not the way these are made. They look identical. So why they offer these different cables, I don't know. Maybe it's just marketing. I don't know. But that's what I found. Also, like I mentioned before, they have these resistors that you have to stick in the top binding post to complete the tweeter circuit. So I shot one with each of the two, one with the 4.2 ohm resistor and one with the 5.3 ohm resistor. And here is the measured responses with the changes in the resistor. The green line is with the 4.2 ohm resistor, And the blue line, it's a kind of a light blue, that's with the 5.3 ohm resistor. So that's how the thing measures. So what that tells me about this speaker is there's a pretty big imbalance here. I mean, right at 600 to 700 hertz down to 300 hertz, there's almost 5 dB worth of swing there. That's a pretty big deal. That's a pretty big drop. So what is that going to do to how it sounds? It's like the lower vocals are going to be a lot thinner and the bass is going to be a lot thinner compared to what it is at that humped up area. And then the tweeter level and everything is kind of brought up to just below that humped up area. So you got an area of brightness there from about 700 or 800 hertz all the way to 2K hertz or more. It's going to be a little more in your face, which matches what the customer told me when he sent these in. He said they're just a little too much in my face. It's like he's just not comfortable with the way that they sound because they're just too forward in that area. And that's exactly how they measure. So apparently that's exactly how Wilson wanted these to go out the door. If they think a big imbalance or a big swing there of almost 5 dB within a short area is a good thing, then I don't know what they're thinking. So next is to see what I can do with it. And let's look at some of the rest of the measurements before we look at what can I do with this thing. Let's look at the horizontal off axis. So let's take a look at that, and it drops off very evenly in the horizontal plane, so I don't see any issues there. Let's look at the vertical off axis. As we look going up, that means we're on tweeter axis and we're going up, which would be like if you're seated in the room and then you stand up. Does it change tonality? Is it keeping an even response throughout the room within the vertical range? Looks like it does. They did a pretty good job there. I don't see any issues there. Then I shot a spectral decay of it, and the spectral decay, for the most part, is pretty clean. There's a few little spots there where we see some things, but overall, the stored energy drops pretty quickly. We don't see any ringing, no big breakup, nothing that's going to just irritate you when you listen to it. I ran an impedance sweep on the thing. Impedance dropped to 4.3 ohms. Not unusual there, but also right there at the port tuning, there was a little dipped area there where there's something going on there. Like there's either a resonance within the port or within the box, and that's coming out the port. So there's definitely an issue right there that is a fixable issue, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Let's look at the raw driver measurements on this thing. If we look at the raw driver measurements of the woofer and tweeter independently here, this is with no network on it, you can see that the woofer's response looks a lot like the measured response of the speaker. The tweeter's response is actually pretty lumpy. Like I said, there's some diffraction going on here off of this foamed edge, and maybe even off of some of these edges here. There's a lot of roughness going on there. And the measured responses that I saw over in Soundstage looked exactly the same. It was pretty rough across there, and the tweeter has one spot there that's pretty aggressive. You can see it in this curve here. That's a pretty big little peak, and I wound up putting a notch filter right there and pulling that thing down. Let's look at those same raw drivers versus the on-axis response. The on-axis response is seen in red. You can see that the woofer's curve pretty much follows that exactly. I should have shot one and saved it of the drivers independently. I could have done that. I don't know why I didn't save that for you, but probably crosses a little higher than they should. Again, let's talk about that baffle step loss. Typically, whenever we're working on any kind of a stand-mounted speaker that's going to be freestanding, you want to compensate for that step loss. And let's look at the woofer's response with no filter on it. And then I just threw a second-order filter on this thing just to show what could be done if it's done correctly. And there's also a notch filter that I had to throw in there right at that peak that's actually develops around 700 to 800 hertz there to pull that down and make a flat response. So that's more what you're looking for typically, is a nice smooth roll off and transition into the tweeter's range. Again, why they selected to have no compensation for that step loss, I don't know. So let's look at what I was able to do with this thing. Let's look at the new frequency response. In fact, let's look at the old frequency response versus the new frequency response. And you can see I compensated for that step loss, brought everything else down to where it's nice and smooth. I even put a little notch filter in the tweeter circuit there and notched out a little egregious little peak that was going on up there. If we look at the new crossover response that I've done on it, you can see that they cross about 1500 hertz, which was no issue for this tweeter. This tweeter can go down really, really low. And then we could see from the raw measurements, it went down really, really low without any filter on it at all. It went down to like 700 or 800 hertz. It's a low FS tweeter. So crossing it there was no problem at all. And it's a third order filter that I've got on it. So it's protected really well. The whole bottom end is completely cut out of it. So that worked out really well. The horizontal off axis now, again, looks really smooth, drops off real evenly. And the vertical off axis looks great, going up and down. No issues there at all. Spectral decay, new spectral decay looks clean still. A lot of that has to do with, whether or not there's stored energy in the drivers or not. Nothing going on there that was a problem. Let's look at the new impedance curve. And if you look at the new impedance curve, you can see it dropped a little bit lower because I had to drop in a pretty aggressive notch filter there in the woofer circuit to pull down the peak that was right around 700 hertz. So we're at 3.5 ohms, so we're a little lower than we were, but not that big a deal. Also, if you'll notice, that little resonance that was there right at the port tuning is now gone. Now, what happened there? How did I make that go away? Well, this thing's got a 3-inch diameter port on the back of it that's pretty long, and I took some fiberglass insulation and stuffed it in there and put it up above it a little bit and on the back side of the tweeter to absorb some of those standing waves that are happening within the box. And just by putting a little bit across the top of it up there, it knocked almost all of that out of it. So there's really not enough insulation in the box that's causing that little dipped area right there at the port tuning. So if you own these, you can just pull that woofer out of there and go in and just add a little bit of insulation, around the back of the box or something, or maybe right in the back behind the woofer. You can easily knock out some of that issues going on. So that was what I was able to do with it. And we'll try to get this up on the site and get you guys a price on it. I'll put together a really nice parts package. I won't throw in tube connectors in this case because I know a lot of you guys want to leave the same binding post. You can do this crossover that I've designed and not even have to take the speaker apart at all. In fact, the customer that owns this pair said he was going to build another external crossover and run the set of jumpers from the new crossover up to the speaker just like it was, and he can listen to it and get all that burned in, and he can do comparisons. And he was pretty excited about it. I'm sure he'll probably post some before and after feedback on that stuff once he gets it all put together. And so you can look for that coming up in a few weeks. I'm sure it'll take him some time to put all this together. He said something about he has a mill and some equipment where he thinks he can machine something out really nice. So it sounds like he's going to do a nice professional job on this thing. So I'm looking forward to seeing how well he does with that. And I'm sure you'll see him posting in our forum. He's already been posting in our forum there at Audio Circle. So if you guys have any questions about this stuff, feel free to hit me with it. I'll try to answer any of the questions you have. And again, thanks for viewing, and subscribe please if you haven't. And we'll see you guys in the next video.